Awesome, perfect. All right, welcome everybody. We hope that you're doing well and staying safe, you and your families. And so today we have a very interesting topic, but before we go and dive right in, we would like to just remind you about some SOPA services that you can benefit from. And to do that, we're going to highlight a few suggested employment priorities that newcomers should prioritize before arriving to Canada to better navigate the labor market. And then we're going to see how SOPA can help you with each one of these components. The first one is understanding the labor market, as well as some job search strategies. As you know, things are different in different countries. There are different websites that can use to look for jobs, different job search strategies, networking, and also how employers hire. What are some key priorities that employers look for? And SOPA can help you with that. The resume and cover letter, those are crucial, adapting resumes to the Canadian format and tailoring them, understanding how ATS works, and the soft skills component. And I intentionally put that icon smaller because unfortunately a lot of my clients underestimate the importance of soft skills, whereas it's crucial in so many surveys with employers. Sometimes soft skills comes at number one in the priorities. And I personally was surprised. We had a webinar with an IT company, and when I asked about the priorities in their hiring, he mentioned that soft skills was the number one, and he mentioned that the company can train people on technical skills, but not on soft skills. So this is really, really crucial, and we really advise you to use SOPA services to sort of gain insights and understanding about interpersonal skills and soft skills in the Canadian workplace culture. Now we're going to see how SOPA can help you. So for labor market jobs or strategy and resume, we do have a couple of courses that can help you with that. One of them is self-guided that you can take on demand at your leisure to understand the labor market, Canadian style resumes, ATS, etc. Or facilitated, you will get a tailored feedback on your Canadian resume as well as cover letter from the course facilitator. Also, some of you may have already met with a SOPA employment counselor. If not, we highly advise you to contact your SOPA counselor and book a session to sort of discuss your long-term, short-term career goal and consult with the counselor on how to get there. As if you're in a regulated profession, your SOPA counselor can help you navigate that as well. And you can get support as well on your Canadian resume and coaching on your cover letter as well. For soft skills, we do have a blend of courses, as you can see on the screen. We do have some facilitated courses, for instance, like complex conversations, working with others, social interactions, etc. And you can receive, again, tailored feedback on these topics. And we do have some self-guided soft skills as well, for instance, Canadian workplace culture as well. And they don't take a lot of time, honestly, but it's a wonderful investment to do before you land. And another great thing is at the end of these courses, you will receive an electronic certificate that you can add on your LinkedIn or under professional development on your resume. Also, if you would like to practice your soft skills during interviews, you can ask your employment counselor for a mock interview. Another great thing about the SOPA program is that we are from ocean to ocean, from coast to coast, and we do have partners in all provinces except for Quebec. So you do receive province-specific support, sometimes even city-specific resources. And without further ado, we're going to meet our guest speaker for today, Carol Essenberg. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today on this amazing topic that a lot of our clients have been asking about. So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, just to read a very brief bio about Carol before I turn the floor to her. So Carol has over 25 years of experience with the Government of Canada, working in various departments. And Carol is a seasoned analyst with a master's degree in biology, who has worked with various federal government departments. So Carol got her teaching English as a second language diploma from Algonquin College in 2016, and taught adult ESL for Ottawa Carleton District School Board and other agencies while working for the Government of Canada, and continues to supply that now that she's retired. And we thank you very much, Carol, for being with us today. And without further ado, you can go ahead and take the floor. And also, please, if you have any questions, please type them in the chat. We will be putting the questions in a document and we will ask Carl the questions towards the end. I will also, if you haven't seen the job posting in the email that I sent you in the reminder, I will post it briefly in the chat so you can download it as well. All right, the floor is yours, Carol. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for attending this presentation. And unfortunately, I'm going to start with an oops. You'll notice on my slide, it says it's a World Skills webinar. It's not, it's a SOPA webinar. So you're in the right place, and sorry about that. And also just quick explanation. I have a parrot on my shoulder. She will be in and out of the screen, and I'm sorry for any distraction that may cause. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. Now my slides are progressing. Come on, progress. There we go. The presentation is divided into 5 parts. The first is just going to be a bit about me and about the format of the presentation. The second section will be an overview of a typical Government of Canada job posting. The third section is a discussion on how job qualifications are assessed at the government. I'll just present a brief summary, and then the last but probably the most important section will be a discussion and time for questions and answers. So, sorry, a bit about me. I'm just going to, have some technical, there we go. A bit about me. As it was presented in the bio, I have a variety of experience and a diverse education. I've got a bachelor's and master's in botany or biology. And I have a post-secondary diploma in teaching English as a second language. So my first position with the Government of Canada was a contract or term position in the formerly named Department of Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. At that position, I was the highest educated, lowest paid person, and that's where I started, and I worked my way up. I had a variety of positions in different departments in the Government of Canada, all in the province of Ontario. There, I gained experience applying for positions and winning competitions, which is basically means you get offered the job. And I was fortunate that since early in my career, I was involved in the other side of hiring. I got to hire students. I was involved in recruiting the students and assisting a manager. I later became a manager, and I got to run the whole competition process from the start to the end. So I'll be drawing on that information to help you and to point out things I've learned both as a person being hired and a person hiring people. In 2015, I decided to expand my horizons a bit, and I enrolled in the Algonquin teaching program, and I got my Teachers of English as a Second Language diploma in 2016. I supply taught in various places within Ottawa, and I taught in the evenings whenever I could. I actually even took days off work from the government to teach, and I co-taught a world skills course on public administration. Then last year during the pandemic, I retired in March, and I am now supply teaching for whatever organizations, and I also run a small gardening business. So that's a bit about me. More importantly, though, a bit about whoops. So now a bit about the talk itself. This presentation focuses on what the Government of Canada job postings look like. I'll present an overview of what the general postings look like and some insight on how you can use this information to apply for the positions and be well prepared. Unlike most private sector job postings, Government of Canada job postings are very specific and set in the way that they're laid out and the kind of information they contain. This is to help ensure that the hiring process is open and transparent and consistent to give everyone a fair chance at the way that they apply for a job. The hiring manager is the one who submits the information to the Human Resource Department, and the Human Resource Department formats it into a consistent format. They also add a bunch of information that is consistent in all departmental postings and sometimes even in all Government of Canada postings. What happens frequently is a lot of information is repeated throughout the job posting, and that's to ensure it's covered. And also sometimes it's an editing mistake that they didn't realize it was covered somewhere else, but it is in the posting multiple places. For this presentation, I'm going to use an actual job posting. It was shared with you earlier, and it's from the Department of Natural Resources. It's actually a department I used to work in, and there's a link to the posting there. So as I talk about the contents of what's in a typical posting, I'll use that as an example. So now we'll go over the actual posting. This is what the front page of a typical job posting looks like. So at first, that first line always gives you the position title, the reference number, and the selection process number. I use the reference number and the selection process number. You should include whenever you're writing correspondence about your application. So if you're writing to ask the status of something, include those numbers. It will help the managers keep track of what you're asking for. The second section always includes the department. In this case, it's Natural Resources, the Surveyor General's branch, and within that, it's the International Boundary Commission. It also tells, sorry, I'm just scrolling down a little bit here. Again, you can use this information to research the department and the position, and I'll tell you more about the research and how that information is important later on in the presentation. The next section is the position category, which is GL Man 05. And that tells you that it's a general trades and labor category level 5 position. I don't expect you to know what that means, but every government position has a code like that. It's ES or AS or I think EL. And you can Google those acronyms in the Treasury Board website of the Government of Canada to learn what the requirements are. And they all have about 6 or 7 levels. So this position's a level 5 in that category. Those categories are all in different unions, and different unions have different salary groupings. They have different education requirements, and they even have different holidays and benefits. So it's useful to look that up to know what a GL category means. The next part of information it also gives you is what type of position, if it's going to be the salary, which is set by the category. So the GL category, that's the salary range. Salary is never negotiable within the Government of Canada. It tells you what kind of position, if it's going to be permanent, if it's going to be seasonal, and when it's going to run. The next section is more details about the department. And as I mentioned, sometimes these positions, the posts are a bit redundant. So this information, Natural Resources, Surveyor General's, International Boundary Commission, you already had once before. But again, this information is really important for you to use to research out the department to be prepared for your interview. And we'll talk about that a bit later. Last section is the who, what, when, where. So it tells you when to apply or when the deadline is. Be very careful reading what time zone it is. So this is Pacific time zone. They will close off applications at that time zone, not the time zone you're in. Who can apply? In this case, it's any person who resides within 500 kilometers of Ottawa, and they tell you how to apply. This case, it's online. Almost all applications are online now. I have not seen any that are purely submit a resume or purely send a letter in. So now we'll look at the sections within a job posting. The first section is, or after the general information, is important messages. And these are the type of information that's populated by the human resource person because it's consistent across the department or even for the whole Government of Canada. It's determined by the current conditions in the country, the hiring conditions, things like that. So examples would be, it talks about information on barrier-free hiring, how to submit your application, and requirements because of COVID. So looking at the specific posting for the natural resources position, It talks about being committed to barrier-free hiring, so they try to make accommodations for you. And it talks about how they're going to manage COVID. There's lots more information in there, but it changes daily and it'll change with the posting. So always be sure to read that section. The next section that's more specific to the job and that the manager would have populated are the duties and work environment sections. So this describes what the applicant's going to be doing and under what conditions. And the applicant or you would use it to decide if you like the job. You have to read it over, and if it talks about things you have no interest in, don't apply for the job. It also tells you what to include with your application. And this case, it even talks about how you'll be working with other people. So for example, the duties section of the natural resources position, it talks about things like you're going to be needing to use equipment, you're going to have to be marking boundaries, and you're going to be following instructions. It also tells you that you're going to be working in isolated areas. So you have to read it and determine if that's something that interests you. The next section is work environment. And in this case, in occasion, it tells you that you'll be working with a team and even how expenses will be covered. So it talks at the end about a travel accommodations, Treasury Board rules for how you're going to be reimbursed for payment. The next couple of sections are the intent of the process and what information you must provide. So the intent of process section tells you if applicants can be placed in a pool and how many positions will be filled. So obviously how many positions will be filled is self-explanatory, but if you're going to be put in a pool, that means that if you are successful in meeting essential qualifications, your name can be put on a list that other managers can pull from for a similar position. That helps them on costs for staffing, and it puts your name in more positions, makes it possible for you to get a similar job that you didn't even apply for. They can be for a specific time period, or they can be an open pool for no timeline. They can be across Canada, or they can just be within the department. And I'll show you an example in a second. And then information you must provide. It's usually just your resume or your CV. It could be something like a sample of your writing. So here, the intent of the process for the natural resources position is that it is going to form a pool, and that pool is going to be used to staff the positions in natural resources at exactly the GL5 group and level. So I have been in positions where it's across Canada. It can be used to staff positions in any department of Canada for that level. And I actually was hired from one of those positions. And information you must provide, generally, it just says your resume. Like I said, it could be a sample of your writing. Now we get into the more interesting parts, because this is very specific to the job. Essential qualifications. And this outlines what you must include in your application. And it usually includes requirements for education and experience. So essential qualifications, it says right on the job application. Your application must clearly explain how you meet these qualifications. If we look at the natural resources, you must say on your application that you have a secondary, post-secondary, I'm sorry, not post-secondary, a secondary school diploma. And experience, it says that you must have 2 years of working doing these two things, and you must have experience in operating. So when you're preparing your application, be sure to mention if you have you have 2 years of doing that work. If you do not have 2 years, if you have 1 year, you may be screened out at this step. You also make sure you mention that you have experience in operating this material. I'll go into a little bit more detail on how you're assessed and what kind of wording you should use to make sure your application is accepted for your experience. Essential qualifications also outline what will be assessed later. It often includes things like language, knowledge, abilities, and personal suitability. So these items do not necessarily show up on your application. You could allude to them or include them on your resume, and they could be included in your application, but they are going to be assessed at some point during the application process. So for the natural resources, they include knowledge. So you have to have knowledge of practices, and they include abilities and competencies. So some of those are very hard to put in a resume. If it's possible, you do include them. They're normally grouped. So like the abilities, competency, like that. So once again, we'll talk about it in the assessment section. Non-essential qualifications, you can think of those as nice to have or assets. They may be required at some point in the competition. So if you've met all the essentials, then they will look at your non-essential qualifications. They're nice to haves. They could give you a heads up or a foot. No, they could give you an advantage over other candidates. So if you have any asset qualifications they ask for, be sure to include them in your resume. So some examples, they often ask for experience, knowledge, certifications, and abilities. And organizational needs, it talks about that they want you to voluntarily identify if you meet any specific underrepresented groups. Sometimes it asks if you're a woman, if you're a visible minority. So I include that I'm a woman on my application. It's non-essential, but it's nice to have, and it could give you an advantage over another position. So now into how these qualifications are assessed. Now, as I mentioned, I have been involved in hiring. So I have done this process, and I'm very impressed on how stringent it is and how accountable the managers must be. So first of all, the manager must determine all the qualifications the candidate must have and document them. So they have to list out the person must be able to do X, Y, and Z. Then they have to document how and when each qualification that they ask for will be assessed during the interview and the job selection process. They also have to document how those items will be scored and what score is required for each qualification in order for them to pass. So it's almost like a matrix or a rubric of marking for each candidate. As I mentioned, you must pass all your essential qualifications before you get assessed on your non-essential qualifications. Then during the application process, the hiring manager has to assess every applicant against each essential qualification and document all the scores and how they were ranked. So if we look at assessing qualifications, since all essential qualifications are assessed and only qualifications can be assessed, we can determine that when you look at the job posting, it gives you a very good idea on how you're going to be assessed for that position. And you can use that information to prepare for your interview and write your application and know what you're getting into. Sorry, that was not very clear. So you can use that information to prepare a clear application and to be prepared for your interview and any kind of tests that they might hold. So let's show you what I mean by looking at the qualifications. So the essential qualifications, we know that that you must clearly show how you meet the education and qualification experience on your application. So we know that those are going to be assessed from your application. So make sure your application clearly states that you have a secondary school diploma and that you state that it's what trade it's in, and even use the word trade in your application so that the word is used from the application. sorry, I had my phone beside me. There we go. Sorry about that. The experiences, when you look at your experiences, you must be sure that you meet each one of them. So in this one, it says minimum 2 years experience in the field of construction. And as I said, make sure that your application shows that you have 2 years of experience in that. And make sure that you use the same words whenever possible, because they often use computer screening to go through the initial review of applications. So you want to make sure that the right words pop up for the computer to recognize that you have the experience. So you want to use the word field in your application. If you can, use the word manual. Second qualification is 2 years experience with hazardous material. So on your application, be sure you use the word hazardous material. And finally, the other experience is operating equipment. So make sure you include the word operating. You can't really prepare for this part. You just have to have had the experience and include it on your application. So assessing qualifications, the post also includes qualifications that will be assessed at a later date. So for the NRCan example, knowledge will be assessed at a later date. So they ask you to look at the knowledge that you have to have knowledge of health and safety practices as they apply to construction. So you know that they're going to be testing you on knowledge at some point. I would include something in my application if I could, that I've worked with health and safety practices, but to prepare for the interview, I would research out health and safety practices in construction, forestry, and labor. So that way, when you go to the interview, you're prepared and you can demonstrate the knowledge of those areas. It also asks that you demonstrate abilities and competencies. So ability to troubleshoot and perform basic maintenance of motorized vehicles. So I would suggest that you include that on your resume if you can. You could say experience troubleshooting and performing basic maintenance, but I would also make sure that you have for the interview maybe a list of the types of vehicles that you've worked with. Ability to operate or use forestry tools. Again, you could include that on your resume, and you would speak to it during the interview process. The ability to communicate effectively orally and basic writing skills. Those two skills could be assessed at any time through the through the application process. So communicating orally, they could look at your application for typos and spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, and that could be marked against you because you do not, I'm sorry, that's writing. I'm sorry, I'm getting nervous. Communicate effective orally, they will look at any time that you are speaking with them could be assessed. So it could be if you phone to ask the status of your application. It could be during the interview if you speak clearly and if you use proper wording and terminology. And it could be used for any kind of follow-up you do on the status of your application. And for basic writing skills, I'm sorry, that's the one I spoke to in error in the first place. Basic writing skills can also be assessed at any point during the a job selection process. It could be looking for typos on your application. It could look at any email communication you send about the position, any follow-up. Those things could all be assessed to determine if you meet those essential qualifications. That's when the manager would have put it, that would be the way the manager had determined they were assessing it, not just at one point. They could also ask for an example of your writing. So when you're communicating and writing or in verbally, be aware that all of it matters and be at your best whenever you can. And the last category is personal suitability. And in this case, the requirement is teamwork. So on your application, you could say worked in a team doing this and this, and that would address it. But it would also be something that they could ask you about during your interview. So I would come prepared with an example of when I worked on a team and when you're asked things like that, be sure that you know what your role on the team was and how it turned out. So don't just say, I was on a team that did X, Y, Z. You want to say, I was on a team, my role was to do this. When I did this, it contributed to the work of the team and we were able to achieve this goal. So you want to make it clear what your contribution was. So your teamwork may be assessed during your interview. It may also be something that they ask your references about. One of the tricks I actually use at the end of my interview would be to ask the interviewers if they would like a copy of my references, and I provide it then so it looks like I'm prepared. Then I go back and I contact my references, tell them that I shared a copy of, I shared their name with the interviewers. I share a copy of the job posting and a copy of my CV or resume with my references. That way my references know what kind of thing the interviewers were looking for, and they have an up-to-date list of what things I have done to remind them if they are contacted by the interviewers. Asset qualifications, they can also be assessed throughout the selection process, but the scores are only used if you met all the essential qualifications, like I mentioned. So for the NRCan posting, asset qualifications, some of them are listed here. I don't think I caught them all. So an asset would that be that you have a certification as a journeyman or apprentice in carpentry. So if you have that certification, include it on your application, and they will mark that accordingly when they come to assessing asset qualifications. Experience in orientating would be something that you can include on your resume, and it also might be something they could ask you about during the interview. Knowledge of work hazardous materials information, that is something that you can research in advance of the interview to gain knowledge of hazardous work information systems. So you can bring it up at the interview. It could also be included in your application if you've got experience working with the hazardous information sheets. Finally, abilities and competencies, similar to experience. If you've worked in wooded areas, you can include that in your application, and they might ask you about that in the references. Then again, they mentioned that they will look for people in visible minorities or women or Aboriginal persons. So if you meet any of those criteria and you would feel comfortable including it in your application, do so, and it would be considered an asset and allow you to get an extra couple of points. So I know I covered a lot of information, but we'll have lots of time for questions. So in summary though, make sure you read the job posting carefully. Ensure your application or your resume address all the essential qualifications and as many asset qualifications as possible. Use the wording from the job posting in your application or your resume as much as possible. You research the department and you use the department knowledge and other information that's included in the posting to prepare for the interview. And I didn't go into that as well as I should have. So I'll just mention, so for example, the Surveyor General's branch was where this position was. If I was going for an interview with that department for this post, I would look up the Surveyor's General branch, get an idea of what they do, get an idea of where they work, and maybe look at the key issues or main factors that are affecting them right now, so that when you come to the job interview and they ask you why you're interested in this position, you could actually speak knowledgeably about that department and the Surveyor General's branch. So you can be prepared for the interview. And also a trick I do is with the job posting, I make a hard copy of it. And as I prepare my application, I put a tick mark to whatever I've addressed in the application and try to cover as much as I can in the application. Things I haven't covered yet or things that I think will be covered in the interviews, I circle, and go out and research and prepare my questions and prepare for the interview accordingly. So once again, I covered lots of material, and sorry, it's very difficult without being able to see your faces to know if I've lost you or not. So I think I would like to open the floor up to the chat and answer questions on anything from hiring to the application postings to any kind of experience I may have. I'd be happy to answer anything I can.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Carol, for this wonderful presentation and amazing insights. And we do have quite a few questions that we have on the document, and I'll be asking shortly. So thank you very much, Carol. And I also would like to thank my colleagues, Andrea, as well as Nadine, for helping with the presentation as well. And you've touched on so many important things, Carol, for like paying attention to the essential qualifications as well, the non-essential. And I wanted to just mention one point as well, that this knowledge can be transversal, and clients can actually take this knowledge and apply it for the private sector as well. For instance, essential qualifications, pay attention to the required section in job description that companies post, or assets or nice to haves. So definitely apply the same logic as well as you apply for other job postings as well. And now we're gonna go ahead and start with the questions. And the first question we have is, do you have job positions, or does the federal government have positions for mechanical engineers?
Yes, I do believe they do. I actually worked with people at Natural Resources who worked on satellite infrastructure. We actually installed satellites up in Inuvik, and those men were all engineers, the people I worked with. And so I'm not sure what category engineers are within the government. I would think that you should be able to do a Google search, government engineers and Government of Canada, and find out what category it would be. I showed you that GL-MAN05. That grouping, there will be one for engineers, and it might be as simple as EN. And search out what that category is, and you'll be able to then do job searches for the Government of Canada on that specific category.
Thank you very much, Carol. The second question is, do jobs in the field of disaster management come only under the federal government or the provincial government, or both?
Oh, that's a great question. And it's funny because one of my positions was actually in emergency management, and it is under both federal and provincial jurisdiction. In Canada, when there's a disaster, the federal government only gets involved if the provincial government calls for their assistance. A lot of areas where there's natural disasters are actually covered by the provincial jurisdiction, so they manage them to the best they can, and the federal government doesn't step in because they don't want to seep over their mandate until there's specific requests. So with the current pandemic, it is not considered a federal emergency, it's a provincial emergency. And so there is workers in the provincial government and the federal government that are emergency management. There's actually even municipal. They go down,
Wow.
the city of Ottawa has emergency management. They should have emergency management planning. And there's, I think it's called FIPA. I'm sorry, it was a while ago since I was at the organization. There's actually an organization where it's outside the government of emergency management workers within Canada.
Perfect. Amazing. That's really great knowledge. And the next question. So the client asked, how long can my name stay in the pool? I believe they're referring to the post-secondary recruitment.
It will depend on the job posting. The one I showed you, the NRCan one, did not have a time frame. And I know that from my hiring, we were pulling someone from the pool, and we were worried of how long they could be in the pool. And I think they had been in at least a year. So I would assume a year unless otherwise stated.
Perfect. Thank you. And the next question is about the websites where they can find opportunities. So are all government jobs posted on the job board or GCA jobs, or are there any places where we can look for them?
They're all posted on that one website. For transparency, they don't want to have hidden sites. They put them all in the same spot. There are other sites if you're already a government employee. If you're already a Government of Canada employee, there's internal sites that we would go to. But at this point, I would assume the people are all external. So that's the only place.
Okay, perfect. That's really good to know. And do I need to have the education or the credentials accredited when applying for government positions?
The posting itself, just a minute, says or degree equivalency. I'm just going to see. Sorry. And here we go, education. Oh, of course it doesn't show there. It's degree equivalency, and I would believe because hiring can take a long time. If you are 1 or 2 credits away from you getting your degree, I would say apply anyway, and say on the time frame, whatever date you started, and then anticipated graduation date of blah, blah. And then in your notes, say 3 credits away, will graduate blah, blah date. And then I would actually follow up when you do graduate. If you haven't heard back, you could send an email to the contact saying, further to position this and this and this, please be aware that I have gained my degree of XY, and even send a copy of the graduation and be proactive for that.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the answer. And the next question is about the hiring process or screening candidates specifically. And the client asks, does the resume need to include the keywords from the job posting, which might be tracked by an applicant tracking system software?
It would not hurt. I would say yes, whenever possible. For example, when I've applied for positions, we use the word supervisor, sometimes we use the word manager, sometimes we'll say report to upper management sometimes, or report to upper, there's some other word they'd use. I go through my resume every time and word change it to what they're asking for. So one version of my resume will say managers. Next time I send it out, I've switched it all to say supervisors. So whenever possible, use those words. There is so many applications that majority will be computer screened first. The ones I ran were internal, so we didn't get that many applications, but the external ones, I'm sure they're going to be screened out first to get it to a manageable level.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Carol. And I'm just wondering if it's possible, because I see that you're sharing your screen, if I can share the screen so you can see the questions.
Oh, I would definitely like to stop sharing.
All right, so let me just share the screen, find the document. And again, I moved to full screen for some reason. All right, perfect. So yeah, so the next question, so you answered the question about the applicant tracking system software. And yes, the next one is a follow-up. So does the government rely on the applicant tracking system when they screen candidates?
Now that's something I'll answer from my perspective, but I will call on my colleagues that are running this webinar to help me, because that is not something for the hiring I have done, internal or external. We didn't use that system at all. So we did not rely on it, but that's only in my very limited experience. So I'm sorry, I'll leave that to my colleagues if they have any knowledge on that.
So when you apply on the that website jobs.gc.ca, I think it's now Canada.jobs. On that one, when you fill the application, you will have a number of questions that you have to answer. And as far as I know, based on that answers, you will be screened in or out. So it is kind of an ATS there too.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrea and Carol, for the answer.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the next question relates to the security clearance, and the client asked, do newcomers need to have lived in Canada for 10 years before they can be eligible for a position that requires a top secret clearance?
Oh, good question. During COVID, getting security clearance for anyone was a nightmare, and my positions all required it. I do not believe you have to be a resident of Canada for 10 years, but I know that it might take a lot longer to run the check if you've lived other places, because they have to track down your references, so to speak, and the people, I don't know, they can talk to your employers, they can talk to a lot of people. So it could take a long, long time to get your security clearance if you haven't resided in Canada for 10 years. I think the residing in Canada is more something that would be outlined actually on the application, where it'll say, you know, residents of Canada, residents, you know, you have to be Canadian citizen, that kind of thing. Those can be screened on for sure, but your security clearance, it just might take longer.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for the insights. And how many types of employment are there in the government? You mentioned the determined contract. Are there more, and what is the difference between them?
There are so many that honestly, I sometimes come to lose track of them. And I cannot even speak to what's happened now since I've been out for a year, but there is contract, there's permanent full-time, there's permanent, there's indeterminate and determinate. One means that you're hired in the government for the rest of your life. That would be indeterminate, and determinate means you're hired for a shorter term. There's contract. Oh my goodness. Yes, there are lots, and I don't think I would like to accurately speak on all of them because I can't keep them all different. But the ones that you're mainly would be interested in is something like a contract. And if you start as a term or a 3-month contract, eventually you're hired permanently. Your term work or your student work even can be applied to your pension. So it's very good to know that. I didn't know that, and it took a while to get it applied. So if you start low like I did, I started with a contract for 3 months and they renewed it 3 times. Then eventually I applied for a permanent position and I got it.
Wow, that's amazing. Perfect. Thank you for sharing, Carol. And the next question is about the location, and are potential candidates able to choose in which city they would like to work, or the government assigns them to a specific regional office or the capital region?
Even with COVID, I do not think you would have a choice to determine where you're going to work. If the posting says positions will be available in these 3 cities, then you can apply and say, I'm applying to work in city 1, 2, or 3. If the posting will say what city, if you don't live there and you get the job, you would have to pay to move there. The new rules with COVID, the NRCan position you saw, it said you had to be within X kilometers of Ottawa. That seems to be the way they're going. They don't assume it's going to all be online. They want you to be able to get to the office if possible, whether it's to get the computer and the software, whether it's because your internet might not work, or because eventually they might be saying you have to get to the offices. They're trying to keep their doors open by saying you have to be near a specific office, and it will say in the posting which office they want you at. So that's not really negotiable.
All right, that's really important to know. Thank you, Carol. And the next question is about the tasks. And is there a written task for all government positions? If yes, where and how can I practice for them?
I do not believe there is one for all positions because they are so varied, from being a farm worker to an engineer to being a survey worker to being a policy analyst. I have written some tests. There's a typical inbox test, but that's usually for management. And I have never seen practice tests online or been aware of one. I don't think there is. Do my colleagues have any ideas about that? Have you heard with your work in the government?
I think it's mainly related to those cognitive and I don't know, client service, something like that tests. I think they are general for everybody. I know I saw actually a couple of, but they usually give you just an example one or two questions to see how that will be, but I didn't see anything else.
And just to add to that, yeah, for them, there are the two main tests, like test of reasoning and test of judgment. There are pages on the federal government's website where you can go and check the description of the task, the sections, what you're going to be measured on, like analytical, logical, and they do provide, like Andrea mentioned, a few sample questions just to understand how it goes. So you can do that on the official website as well.
Oh, and if I may speak a little bit to just something that Mar mentioned is the importance of soft skills. One of the things that people are very surprised about with the government, and I think with a lot of jobs now, is the importance of soft skills. That would be assessed through personal suitability, where it said teamwork in that last posting. And I mentioned to my colleagues that I actually was unfortunate to be in the position where I had to let an employee go, and it was almost 100% on soft skills. The man knew his work, but his soft skills were unacceptable and they were not something he was able to learn. So just reiterating what you had mentioned before. Sorry, off topic though.
No, but that is very powerful. Thank you so much, Carol, for mentioning, because we do try always encourage our clients to take our soft skills courses and just learn about soft skills in general, like, and especially the Canadian workplace cultures. That is valuable knowledge. Thank you so much for emphasizing it.
Yeah, it's 700% important.
Wow, that's so true. Thank you. And the next question is still about the testing, and do the scores of the public service exams, like the test of reasoning, are they crucial or they need to be high before the HR department can look at a candidate's resume and application?
Unfortunately, I have not used those scores in my hiring, but I would think that I had mentioned that the manager has to say what skills need to be met and how they're going to be assessed and what scores they need. The manager would have the discretion of giving how much importance those scores would have. So one manager might say that you have to have a very, very high score in order to even get screened in for the first review of scores. But the next manager might say those scores don't mean that much. As long as you passed, I'll let you in. I think they would have to, I don't know if the scores themselves say anything about what a pass level is. If the scores say you have to have a pass level of X, then obviously that would apply. But other than that, I think it's up to the managers to determine the importance of those tests.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Carol, for the answer. The next question, do all government jobs require job experience, or are there certain entry level, let's say data entry jobs that can take people having little experience?
Okay. You have to have experience, but not necessarily with the government or directly doing if it's say data entry for, well, I'll use my example. I did data entry for Indian and Northern Affairs Canada. I was hired because I had data entry experience entering plant data into a database for my master's thesis and for a job I had with a plant royalty company. So I did have experience using databases. I did have experience entering data, but it was not data on First Nation students in a First Nation education database. So you do have to have some level of what they're asking for. They can't train you from blank, but if it's asking for experience writing reports, all you have is experience reports in university, that is still experience writing reports. If they say experience writing 4 years, experience for 4 years writing reports that are submitted to upper management, then you probably would not be able to get in there with just with a university report.
And that makes perfect sense. Awesome. Thank you so much, Carol. And the next question is about the duration and the hiring process. So typically, how long after someone applies for government jobs should they expect to get a first response?
It can be a very, very long time. I've applied for jobs and I'd forgotten about them, and then they called me back. So it can be about a year. And especially because of COVID, and things change as they're developing the job description. For example, the idea, the person asked about living near the city that you're applying for. The first time we had our job posting up, we thought you could live anywhere because they told us you could internet work. Then they changed it and said, no, you have to be within this many miles of Ottawa. So the process might change while the manager's working, or something can happen within the department that my manager left and I had to run it myself. Or if there's an election, you can't run a competition during an election unless it's an essential position. So that can slow it off. When COVID hit, we were put off for months and months before we could get our online application process figured out. So there can be a lot of reasons why it can delay for a long time that you might not even know about as an applicant. Sometimes the funding for the position didn't come through and they're still fighting in the background to get the money. None of that means the position's canceled. I, as a rule, apply, and if I don't hear back in about 2 months, I send a very polite email to the contact name and very professional, because it could be being assessed, referencing the selection and the process number, and just saying, I applied for position XYZ. I'm interested in confirming that you received my application and wondering about the status and when I might hear from you next on this competition. Often they'll respond and saying, oh, something's going on. We won't be looking at it again for another 6 months. Then I put it in my calendar 6 months later, I'll follow up and say what's happening. So you are allowed to contact them, but don't nag, give them a reasonable amount of time. And I have a tendency of going in passively saying, oh, just checking on this, not going in confrontationally.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Carol. And I see that we are right at noon, technically the end of the presentation. So I want to ask Carol, if you have another commitment at noon, we can stop here, or if you're good to take a few more questions, up to you.
I'm good to take a few more questions. If you don't mind, for some reason, my Google is gone off on by itself and I'd love to go and tell it to shut up. So may I come back in just a minute, please? Because it's driving me nuts, and I'll be right back and take more questions.
Of course. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, Carol. And I see that we received a lot of questions, and we will share with you a few resources after the presentation. Carol mentioned that she will share the PDF for the presentation with us, so we'll definitely share that with you as well. All right, and we can go ahead. I will go ahead and just stop the recording, but we'll continue with a few